All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Story Hour. I'm your host, Daniel Marcus. My unparalleled co-host is Laura Blackwell. First of all, I apologize. I'm kind of a disembodied voice tonight. I'm in the midst of a power outage in Berkeley. I've got my iPad tethered to my phone, and we tried doing video when we did the tech check a few moments ago, but it just didn't work. So I've got video disabled, and I'm just a voice in the darkness tonight. So I hope that you're all healthy and safe and taking care of yourselves and people that you care about. You know, we started Story Hour during lockdown, year before last, over 2 years ago. And the intention was really, I was thinking just a kind of a smallish community, sharing writing with our friends and building a sense of community in a very challenging time. And it's just grown way beyond that. And we've been going strong every week after week for over 2 years now. And we've had some wonderful writers coming through these Zoom rooms. So the way this works is that Story Hour turns to what I like to think of as an ancient and time-honored form of entertainment, which is folks sitting around the fire telling each other lies. So every week we've got two authors, about 30 minutes each, doing exactly that. And tonight we're very happy to have M.L. Krishnan and Scott Nicolay. It is our custom to ask authors to indicate a worthy cause for us to call your attention to. And if you're fortunate enough to be in a position to help, to do that. M.L. Krishnan is reading tonight for 826 Michigan. 826 helps school-age students in Southeast Michigan write better futures one story at a time with the help of a network of dedicated volunteers. Scott is reading tonight for SWOP.net, the Southwest Organizing Project, whose mission is to empower disenfranchised communities in the Southwestern United States to realize racial and gender equality and social and economic justice. And somebody will slam those URLs into the chat pod in Zoom. So please follow through. And as I said, just for information purposes, that's great. But if you feel compelled to contribute, that's even better. So tonight we are going to start with M.L. Krishnan. M.L. Krishnan originally hails from the coastal shores of Tamil Nadu, India. She is currently the marketing director of Choreo, a quarterly magazine of speculative fiction and migration. She is a 2019 graduate of the Clarion West Writers Workshop. Yay, Clarion West. We get a lot of Clarion West people coming through these rooms, myself included. And her work has appeared or is forthcoming in the Best Microfiction 2022 anthology, Death in the Mouth, the Best of Contemporary Horror, The Offing, Apparition Lit, Baffling Magazine, Paper Darts, Sonora Review, and elsewhere. Her stories have been nominated and shortlisted for the Stabby Awards, Best of the Net, the Best Microfiction Anthology, the Bath Flash Fiction Award, and more. You can read her work at mlkrishnan.com or find her on Twitter at EMEL Krishnan. Megha, take it away.
All right. So the story I'm going to read today is titled The Eggshell Sanctuary, and it is forthcoming in Death in the Mouth, a BIPOC contemporary horror anthology edited by Sloan Leong and Cassie Hart. Content warning, violence, partner abuse, and self-harm. The Eggshell Sanctuary. Back at the beginning, she could count among her possessions a man, a marriage, a too small bed in a too big flat, 2 bicycles, a gas stove, and long walks through teeming, humid beaches. That day began like any other. After the banality of her morning routine, a work commute in a suffocating bus, an afternoon at the office laced with the usual admixture of ennui and dread, she traveled to the market and purchased gourds of all kinds for dinner, some ridged with furrows on their skin, some long and velvety slick, and some armed with jagged haphazard teeth to safeguard the bitter flesh within. She briefly considered the pods of tamarind packed tightly into obsidian slabs, its pulp glimmering against the hurricane lamps that came alive at dusk. She picked up a slab and returned home. After a ride in a less suffocating bus, she prepared a stew of tamarind and jaggery and half moons of bitter melon that failed to meet his arbitrary needs. An argument ensued, right on cue. Their courtship had been as brief as it was unmemorable, a light for a fleeting moment and then sputtering into an impasse. To take up space, this was all they had left. So they spun around the too small bed, arguing about everything, about nothing. They argued until they forgot what they were arguing about and continued anyway, invoking their vast reserves of misplaced stubbornness, because giving in now would simply be unwise. Their decibel levels rose steadily. He shouted, she shouted right back. At that precise moment, something smooth and brittle and solid slipped through her lips, and she spat it out on the cotton duvet. And there it was, 2 cracked halves of a quail's eggshell, dappled in yellows and browns, slicked with remnant bits of her dinner. The flat soon filled with eggshell shards of all kinds. Sometimes they spattered out of her mouth in pyrotechnic displays of rage or despair, coating every surface in her immediate vicinity with calcium carbonate specks that shone like exclamation points. Sometimes, all it took was a single instance that acted as a hair trigger. It had been an ordinary afternoon until he had returned home from work with purpose. He had announced that he, as of this very moment, would stop selling chip funds to octogenarians who did not need them, would stop this office rubbish altogether. It is enough, he had said, as though the conversation was already over, as though she was spit-spun, less his wife and more a filigree of skin and hair laid over flesh, as though she was inanimate. Enough for whom? Her voice had swelled, bumping against the ceiling fan. For whom? He did not scream expletives as he would have usually done. Instead, he had aimed precise kicks at a living room chair until its legs shattered like kneecaps, fracturing down its curved length. In response, a seething malaise began thrumming at her tailbone, rising up through the curve of her vertebrae and detonating at the base of her skull. She had felt her gut folding into pleats across her abdomen, as if to gasp, to breathe. Her neck had contracted into a vomit sneeze then, until a half eggshell inked with lacquer black splotches pushed itself out of her mouth. Indian swiftlet, she had sighed almost inaudibly. It had been one of his early warnings, she would later recall, back when she had still thought of him as considerate, back when his outbursts encircled her briefly and dissipated in a plume of tedium. At his insistence, they began visiting a conveyor belt of doctors whose declarations of her normalcy arranged itself into a choral refrain of no, and you're perfectly all right. And have you been exercise, yoga, hot, unicycling? And here's a good psychologist. And you need sleep. Of course you need sleep. Please sleep. We insist you sleep. After the doctors, his brief flare-up of concern for her hardened into impatience. He convinced himself that she had shoved eggs into her mouth as a deliberate nauseating ruse, the mechanics of which escaped him. So he took to hiding. He began folding himself under tables and into cupboards. He held himself very still in tight, dark corners of the flat. He would leap out and ambush her at odd intervals, hoping somehow that in startling her, she would lead him to her undisclosed reserve of eggs and admit to her treachery, or a sudden offbeat sense of humor, or maybe even an arcane interest in oology. What it was he wanted, he could not say. It did not help that the shock of his initial raids made her shriek out cracked halves of bile-slicked eggshells that only served to reinforce her growing distaste for him. It did not help that she kept all her shells, and he hated referring to them as hers per se, but they were. From the toenail-like shards that began appearing in stacks in the living room, to the ones nestled carefully between tea towels and dressers that she had bought expressly for this purpose. It seemed as though every conceivable surface, as far as his eye could withstand seeing, was caked with them, forming a calcium-rich testa around the perimeter of the house, around the body of her, as she moved unseeing around the figure of him, around the desiccated scrap of her feelings, of his, a shelled carcass. He left one day as she knew he would. Slowly, methodically, her spaces tipped into his. She claimed his sink for the duck and chicken eggs, hilly undulations of white and green glistening against the dull tint of the porcelain. Mallard, she would whisper, running her hands through them. Leghorn, Eurasian teal. His office became a conservatory for the rarer, almost whole specimens. They dozed quietly in floor-to-ceiling armoires, each drawer housing eggs of increasing sizes. One Tuesday, she removed an oval eggshell out of the topmost drawer. Pockmarked with red bumps that leveled into lavender gray bands, it sat quietly on her palm. White rumped vulture, she mouthed. On an earlier Tuesday, unlike any Tuesday that had come before, much like every other Tuesday that had come after, she discovered to her mild surprise that brick walls were more porous than concrete, and thus more suited to the ribbons of pain tearing through her body as he pitched her into its surface and flung her down to the floor. Afterwards, her slow creep across the tiles of the living room, interrupted by his feet on her hip bone, sternum, forehead. We are now complete. A thought elbowed into the pain-laced mist of her consciousness. Their story now arced in a way that was clean. A finale that had the heft and the predictability of a bookend. His snipes, their arguing, the crumpled table, her crumpled body. There had once been a shaving of tenderness, but it had been so long ago. Maybe if she had been quieter, more pliable. Maybe if her mouth hadn't given her away in more ways than one. And then the door being bolted shut, his footsteps retreating, and then a familiar, unfamiliar revulsion. She welcomed this new pressure uncoiling against herself with a desperate gulp of need for something close to a release. There was a calm in the air as the eggshell, whole, she knew, almost ripped the blue-tinged skin across her clavicles as it swelled alarmingly outwards, worming itself out of her esophagus, her throat. Then the heave, the impossible lurch as her head lolled backwards, but this one was bigger than everything that had come before, and she lay gasping, white froth pooling at the sides of her mouth. The shell shone in the pre-dawn light, its red bumps illuminated by the ropes of her spittle that webbed around its surface. White rumped vulture. It was the loveliest one yet. She withdrew almost entirely from anything outside the boundary of her flat, only allowing herself to inhabit the semi-permeable landscape of her bedroom, her kitchen, her bathroom. Every morning, she ran the back of her hand over the islets of deepening color on her throat, grading the wounds that scalloped her neckline, the phylum of hurt across her waist. On one of his first tirades, when the shock of it was still pulsing and slick, her ankle had turned to sponge as a hematoma inflated around it. Burst capillaries tinting her feet reddish brown. She had held an almost whole eggshell between her lips that day, willing it to stay in her mouth as he loomed in the doorframe, even if just for a moment. Eastern Tauhi, she forced herself to remember. Eventually, familial concerns slowly trickled in through the windows and pooled under her entryways. Some evenings, her mother attempted to speak to her. Her stomach hummed in anticipation as the phone rang. "How are you, Karna?" her mother asked, calling her by a childhood endearment that singed the top of her ears. "Amma, I'm okay. I eat, I sleep, I bathe," she said, her words immediately nodding into apology-laced assertions. "Bathe? Sometimes." "What does he think?" her mother finally asked. Her gut began to churn. "I can feed and bathe myself, Ma, I can." The churning soared upwards. It culminated in an almost pleasant column of discomfort that streaked across her jawline. Her mouth contorted as she ended the conversation with her mother, a pale shard falling from her lips. She picked it up and pushed it gently into her wrist. She savored the shard's pressure as its blunt, cool edge punctured the scrim of her skin. With time, the eggshells began changing in shape, tone, and intensity, appearing sporadically at first and then almost not at all. When they eventually did appear, they were weak approximations of what they had once been. She wondered if it had anything to do with a lack of freshness, a vanishing taxonomy of bruises, a once bright harness of agony outlined over her ribcage, a thumbed memory of pain around her forearm. Pale, rockfinch, silverbill. The names of smaller and still smaller birds tumbled out of her mouth and hung in the air as though in absolution or warning. Plainback sparrow. The names began to fade as soon as they appeared, falling right through her as though she was blurry, indistinct. One evening, a decision congealed inside her skull. She oiled and combed her hair, letting it pour in tumbling curls down her shoulders. She sloughed off all her clothes and sat cross-legged on the floor of her living room. Her feelings quietly spun out of her in great coils, the larger ones arcing into a parabola of off-whites and speckled blues. Bustard, she whispered fondly. Kestrel, condor. The smaller eggshells sliced through the rest of the flat in crisscrossing lines of browns, greens, and fleshy pinks. They traced pathways from the empty dressers and armoires to the balcony, the kitchen counter, windowsills. Uneven pieces of eggshell shards lay askance like sea glass, flattening into tinier and even tinier slivers that rayed outwards. They spilled out of her doorway and down the steps of her building, a roadmap to her waning sentience, to the nucleus of her. People bustling about on the streets trickled into her house, intrigued. Some of them are brave, pelting her with small stones or soft fruit, sometimes jabbing at her with tree branches. But they soon wearied of her lack of response, unnerving in its placidity. Dusk slanted in under the windows. She cradled an oblong eggshell in her arms. She waited for something or someone. For him, perhaps, or maybe even another. After a week or a year or an instant, she felt a tightening across her pelvic floor, her gut clenching in anticipation for what was to come. And that's it.
Wow, that was remarkable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It is our custom here at Story Hour to just be quiet a moment between stories and let what we've just heard sort of resonate and ring for a couple of minutes. So we're going to do exactly that. I haven't gone anywhere, especially since all you can hear is a disembodied voice. But I'm just going to chill for a couple of seconds and take a deep breath before we move on to the next thing. Well, ML Krishnan, thank you so much. Our next writer is archaeologist, caver, and World Fantasy Award winner Scott Nicolay. He's the author of 2 collections of short fiction, Anakai Tangata, Tales of the Outer, the Other, the Damned, and the Doomed, a great title, and the newly released And At My Back I Always Hear. He's currently completing his PhD and working on a collection of nonfiction weird tales. Scott, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I really struggled with what to read tonight. As you mentioned, I have a brand new collection out. It's less than 2 weeks old. It's called And At My Back I Always Hear. And unfortunately, there's nothing in it sort of enough to read in this time slot. I tend to write in the mid-range of novellas and novelettes and novellinis and very long stories, which is not the best commercial approach, as you probably are aware. But I've done all right so far, not financially per se, but the work seems to get out there. However, as you know, from what you read, I am working on I have started a third collection, and my idea for this is to do creative non-fiction weird fiction, sort of like In Cold Weird, you know, like sort of in the Truman Capote mode. Although try to be a little more, unlike Truman Capote, I don't try to remove myself from the story. So I'm a little more like Hunter Thompson, but not as much drugs. Not really any drugs. At least I'm not doing them, not these days. And I have published the first piece in that, what I hope will be a third book. And it appeared in this volume here. It's sort of a journal. It's a beautiful book-like, I mean, I thought it was a magazine when I submitted it, but it's really a book or an anthology. It's called Spoon Knife, and this was in their 5th edition, and the theme was liminal, so this piece really fit in here. So it's called The Thing in the Hole in the Tree. You know, I've entered the information in the link to where you can. Oh gosh. Nobody heard a word I said there. Good Lord.
Just for about 10 seconds, you went dark.
Okay. So real quickly, well, you only missed 10 seconds, or you only got 10 seconds?
Yep.
I think we got everything
we heard the introductory
up until the story.
Oh, I don't know how I muted
Yes.
there, but okay, then that's good. All right, so this is called The Thing in the
Jealous
Hole
pixies.
in the Tree. And it's all, there's no narrative hijinks in here. This is all intended as being honestly real. At least it's the best that I can describe it. And it should just fit the time frame. The Thing in the Hole in the Tree. My mother still lives in the house where I grew up, but I can barely recognize the place in the occasional photos she sends me. Aluminum siding has replaced the old wooden shingles. The landscaping is different in every regard, and she never replaced the fences on the sides of the yard, which is why she sees deer in her flower beds now. Given the way wildlife has bounced back in that area since I lived there, it might not be long before she gets a bear. When I visited several summers ago, there had just been bear sightings around where the train tracks cross Marlborough Avenue, which is not so far away from her house. Half a mile away at most. Where there are deer, bears will follow soon enough. When you see him quid, then you see him quick bottom whale, as Queequeg says. Cause and effect still conjoin in at least some circumstances, but the house of my childhood and the house I sometimes visit no longer align. One of the most important steps in a child's cognitive growth is the development of object permanence, which according to Piaget usually occurs by the age of 2. Object permanence refers to the ability to recognize that an object continues to exist even when it is no longer visible. The first step toward this is visual tracking. Hold up your finger in front of a baby's face. Move it from side to side. Do the baby's eyes follow it? If so, then that child has met one of their first developmental milestones. Now when the child is perhaps a year old, take their favorite toy and put it under a box or behind your back. How does the child respond? Try hiding their mother. Does the child understand that she still exists? I have come to believe that something went very wrong with my sense of object permanence from early on. My mother still lives in the house where I grew up, but the large and gnarled apple tree that stood in the northeast corner of the backyard is gone. Memory says it blew down in one of the hurricanes that sweep through New Jersey every decade or so, as if for exactly that purpose. I could ask my mother to look up the date the tree fell in one of her diaries, but I won't. The tree is secondary to our purpose here, tertiary really. In the tree there was a hole, and in the hole there was a thing. The thing in the hole in the tree inhabit my oldest memories, but the tree and the hole are gone. In my memory, the tree was always tall and vast in its expanse. As we were the first family to live in our house, like all our neighbors on that little street, it must have already been old when I was a child, a relic of the farmland or forest that lot had been before our home, before I was born. Decades later, I can call up images of that trunk's gray expanse with ease, of the eczymatic flesh, how it felt against my palms, the way its pliable branches broke green beneath their bark, when bent too far, made to bear overmuch weight. It bifurcated so low I could climb into its crotch before I was old enough to go to school. Standing in that tree as a child of perhaps 3, I could just barely see into the hole. Not a knot hole, but a real hole, a deep hole, as wide as my face and filled with ants and spiders and stagnant water. And wait, we will get there. A thick limb must have broken off from that spot on the interface of the half of the trunk that leaned out over Mr. Jones's yard. Mr. Jones was our back door neighbor, living behind us on Locust Avenue when Venice Avenue bent round in an oxbow. His next door neighbor, catty corner to us on the north, was another Mr. Jones. On cool summer evenings, both Mr. Joneses often held court from lawn chairs in the open doorways of their respective garages, and I sometimes rode my bike up their driveways to chat with one or the other, or each in turn. I remember them both as friendly and wise, but the first Mr. Jones was also the first in our block to fence his backyard, so his tolerance for us neighborhood kids must have had its limits. After that, no more taking refuge during sudden summer thunderstorms under the green corrugated awning of his redwood picnic table. Neither is the hole itself my subject here, but we are closing in. Like Mr. Jones, that hole was one of 2, as was the tree itself. The other old apple tree was in my grandparents' yard, maternal, not paternal, their side yard, not the back. They lived almost a mile away and are both gone, my grandfather in 1977 and my grandmother in 2001. It was their house I used as the setting of my story that won an award. Their tree was also ancient and gray, forked just as low and spread even wider. Its secondary trunks probably bowed far out, perhaps by the childhood climbing escapades of my uncles and aunts and maybe my mom. My grandparents' home was my second home, as I grew up thinking an ancient apple tree in one's yard was the norm. Nothing in my memory tells me how long that other tree has been gone or why, and I doubt my mother would remember either. She doesn't seem to care about such things. My brother and his family live in my grandparents' house now, and a smooth, unbroken lawn covers the space where that other tree once stood. My brother has 2 kids, just as we are 2. The hole in our tree was also one of 2, and the other hole was higher and on the back of that other half of the trunk that hung out over Mr. Jones's yard. I don't think I knew about the second hole till I was a little older and Mr. Jones put up his fence, because the only way to see it was to climb up and stand on the flat top rail of that fence. Mr. Jones's fence was the kind they call basket weave, with thin red boards woven together in rectangular sections and fitted into grooved posts. I never see that kind of fence anymore. My parents put up matching fence on both sides of our backyard not long after, and most of the neighbors put up their own fences soon after that, every fence a different kind. I never thought about it then, but looking back, it was around the time a black family moved in catty corner to us on the other side of the first Mr. Jones that everyone started putting up fences, except the second Mr. Jones. He never put up a fence. The black family did not live there long, and all the original fences on the block have been replaced with new and different fences. Whoever lives in the second Mr. Jones's house now has the highest fence on the block. The second hole connected to the first, which means that section of the tree was already rotted out and hollow through when I was little. It's surprising that back half of the tree did not fall long before it did, given the periodic hurricanes. Camille hit in '69, which cannot have been too long after the time I am describing. The 2 holes were therefore the openings of a single tube or tunnel running through several feet of one half of the trunk. After whatever original accidents snapped off the large limbs that must have once stuck out in those spots, whether gale force winds or careless climbing kids, and beyond any fungal infection that presumably entered thereby, much of this passage was likely the work of carpenter ants. The ants were a special feature of that tree. Carpenter ants, if you have never seen them, are jet black and big, at least half an inch long, truly formidable when you are a kid. Supposedly they bite, but I don't recall them biting me or anyone else, even though they were always filing along the fence and streaming up the tree, and we often climbed both, even though Mr. Jones would yell at us when we climbed on or over his fence. The ants go back as far as my memories of the tree go back, which means they go back as far as my memories go. Like termites, they chew through dead wood, but unlike termites, they cannot actually eat wood. They don't have the gut bacteria to digest it. Not that I knew that then, although I knew a lot about all kinds of insects well before I started kindergarten. Carpenter ants are still a concern for homeowners, however, and by the time I was in high school, they had infiltrated our garage, probably because hurricanes flooded the basement and garage and begun to rot the wood. I think my parents hired an exterminator at some point after I moved to New Mexico in 1989. Until I visited my mom this past summer, I hadn't seen a carpenter ant in decades, but on that visit, I saw them in her house 3 separate places and times. They looked even bigger than I remember them from when I was a kid, which tells you something because I've spent time in the jungle and seen some pretty damn big ants. I'm afraid they're coming back, which is bad for my mom, bad for that house. I told her about them, but she didn't seem to care. I'm not sure I ever saw carpenter ants in the hole before I found out it was just one end of a tunnel. I can definitely remember them funneling through it on a regular basis later. What matters is the ants must have made that hole, and they made it more foreboding just by their presence in the tree, although the hole was unpleasant enough without being full of giant ants. Besides the ants, the spiders, and whatever else might have been hiding there, the hole was filled into its incurved lip with foul, inky water. I can still smell that water, barely, but I can. I have a pretty good memory for smells from my youth. I can almost also call up the smell of my grandmother's front porch, dank rhododendrons and moldering concrete. In my memory, that whole small swamp smells of sulfur, of methane, of things ripe with death. Not that I knew much of sulfur or methane or death at the time, but I can make those associations now. Here we are then, at the hole. Something floated in the water in that hole. Something, a thing, round and pale as things float in dark waters ought to be, like an eyeball or a boiled egg. That thing retains a kind of iconicity for me, which is to say that not only is it fixed in my memory, but also that I remember it as already a fixture of the tree the first time I climbed in its divided crotch. I can recall someone showing the thing to me in a way that may have been a warning. My mother, maybe, or one of the older kids, Debbie Kerbo, or either of the Sanders girls next door. I think it even had its own name, but if it did, the name itself does not remain in my memory. There's just the memory that the thing maybe had a name. If it did, it was probably just the thing, or the thing in the hole. What I describe as iconicity in my memory, that the thing in the hole in the tree in my yard was already established as a presence from the first moment I ever stood in that tree. The thing in the hole commanded my attention, controlled how I moved in that tree, perhaps even called me to ascend and regard it. I can remember looking into the hole to check the thing was still there each time I climbed the tree, routinely, a ritual, before I climbed higher or did anything else. No one touched the thing or even tried to, but it was a focus of the tree, and the tree was the focus of our yard and even our neighborhood, because all the kids came to climb it back when none of the houses or on our blocks had fences. Consider that the thing was already well enough known that someone made a point to show it to me once I was old enough to see it, an initiation. And all the while, it just floated in its hole. In my memory, the thing looks most like a turnip, though that has to be among the least likely things it might have actually been. It might have been an old rubber ball, maybe one that belonged to the Sanders dog, the dog that tried to bite me once but bit my mother instead when she got between it and me. Maybe that thing was a wild onion. Usually wild onions were small, at least in my hometown, but every now and then some kid would pull up one the size of my fist, like an onion from the store, but dirty and purple with little dangling roots. Whatever the thing was, someone probably put it in the hole on purpose, but what their purpose might have been, I never knew and never will know. And if anyone else knew it, I never knew they knew. Now that I'm writing about it, the obvious thought occurs that it was probably an apple. It's possible an apple could have fallen from the branches right into that hole all on its own, or some kid might have stuck an apple in there. You have an apple in your hand and there's a hole in the apple tree, so why not? I don't recall the thing looking like an apple though, and I think I would have recognized it as an apple if that's what it was. Apples get darker as they rot, not white. Once that tree got going in the summer, it dropped apples the way I drop F-bombs today. By fall, its side of the yard became a minefield of fallen apples and every degree of rottenness from hard and fresh to mushy brown. Mostly wormy too, just like the cartoons, though the worms never had human faces or tiny hats. I can't say whether these apples were edible because no one ever ate them. Like touching the thing in the hole, eating those apples seemed an unspoken prohibition. From time to time, I asked my mother why we never ate them, but she just scrunched up her face and shook her head. We called them crab apples, but I don't think that name is right, as crab apples are small and these were a decent size, if not as large as apples from the store. The only thing we ever used them for was chucking at each other or at cars. We had some epic apple fights in those days. The point is I knew early on what apples from that tree looked like, so I would have known if the thing in the hole in the tree was an apple. Although all these years that thing has been in my mind, and I never considered till now it might have been an apple, not until I wrote about it. How long the thing in the hole was physically present in my life, I can't recall. In my memory, that period feels like an entire summer, but maybe it only took a few days. Childhood memories distort that way. That period has an end, however, or a climax at least, if no denouement. To the best of my memory, this is how it went. At some point, my fixation on the thing took a more active turn, and I decided I wanted to see it out of its hole. Whether this happened days, weeks, or months after the first time I saw it, I cannot recall. Neither are my original motivations for wanting to move it clear to me now. It may be the thing's presence that begun to bother me, or that my curiosity grew till I felt the need to see it out of the light. I have a vague sense that at some point the thing's aura diminished to the point where it intimidated me less, and that may be why I made my move, or perhaps I just got bored. I've always gotten bored easily. A few years after the events I'm describing, I was diagnosed with what is now known as ADHD. Our doctor prescribed Ritalin, and I had to take that until junior high. That came with a stigma. Neither can I recall exactly how I got the thing out. I probably used a stick or two to move it. What I do remember is how it popped out of the hole with unexpected suddenness and ease. I must have flinched reflexively and shut my eyes out of fear it might touch me or get some of that muck on my face or clothes. I recall a glimpse of the thing tumbling to the ground on my right. My right is facing Mr. Jones's house. Mr. Jones, the first Mr. Jones. That was the last time I saw it, it being the thing, not the house. Although I only closed my eyes for a moment, when I opened them again and hopped down from the tree, the thing had disappeared. It should have been right there on the ground. I looked all over and called the other kids to help, but no one could find it. If it really was an apple, it might have gotten mixed in among all the other apples lying around, except I think I would remember if it had been an apple. I can't remember how I flipped the thing out of the hole or why, but I can remember vividly how I searched all around the tree, and my memory shows me only thin grass and packed dirt. Maybe it was spring and there weren't any apples down yet. I don't think that thing was an apple, and I don't think any apples were on the ground at that time, meaning it was either too early or someone had raked them up. All of that happened half a century ago. After that, the thing disappeared as a tangible, visible thing to be followed in time by the trees and the hole, all the old fences, and both Mr. Jones's. Disappearing is not the same as being gone. All those other people and things are gone, but I know where they went, or at least the general how and why of their leave taking. The thing disappeared forever a second after I flipped it out of its hole, but it is not gone. I never once climbed into the apple tree afterward without checking in the hole to see if the thing had returned, or if another thing like it had appeared. How I would have distinguished a second thing from the first, I do not know. But I swore if a second one showed up, I would not repeat my mistake. I knew if I could examine a second thing, I could solve the mystery of the first. No second thing ever appeared, however. Not there, and not in any of the similar holes in the other tree in my grandparents' yard, because I began to check those as well. I didn't just look for the thing in the holes in the trees, though. For as long as I lived in that house, I never went near that corner of the yard without thinking of the thing and searching for it, if only for a moment. Pushing the lawnmower years later, I looked for it on every circuit of the yard. Even though I don't live there anymore, that weird little sphere has never left my thoughts. Somehow I still expect to find it. I moved west after I graduated college in 1989, first to New Mexico, then several years ago on to California. My father died in 1995. For the last 10 years or so, I've gone back to visit my mother once or twice a year, sometimes with my own kids, sometimes without. At some point during my visits, I always walk out in the backyard, usually because my mom wants to show me her flowers, and I always look for that thing. Not only does my mind tell me it is somehow still there, it tells me exactly where to look. The corner of the yard where the thing disappeared has changed over the years. The apple tree is gone, as I already said, along with the pit beside it where my father and later I myself would dump the grass clippings from our mower. All the other trees that used to occupy the yard are also gone. The ginkgo I planted when I was 7 went down during Sandy. My mother sent me photos of that when it happened. Mr. Jones's fence is gone, but whoever lives there now has put up a new one. It's tall and white. It looks like plastic. We are left then with the Liturian litany of vanished pairs, 2 houses, 2 yards, 2 trees, 2 holes, 2 Mr. Joneses, 2 brothers still here, but this is not about 2 brothers. All those other things are gone, but the singular thing in the hole in the tree is not. I realize now it will never go. In whatever way it still exists, it will always exist. Perhaps somehow it caused me to free it from its prison in the tree, just as it compels me now to tell its story. The story belongs to the thing after all, not to me. Blah, 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 blah. Rational explanation, I know. Probably whatever that thing really was, rotten apple or rubber ball, it bounced or rolled away in the grass or into Mr. Jones's yard or somewhere else. I think I looked, but didn't. It must have dissolved into dust, into molecules long ago. I know. That's not the thing I'm talking about now. The thing under discussion exists in my cognitive framework, the part of my mind that insists this pale orb, eyeball or turnip or onion or egg still occupies some space in the corner of my mother's backyard. Somehow when I popped the thing out of its socket in the tree, I popped it out of normal space. It became inaccessible, and so it remains remote and at some strange remove, yet with me always. It left its imprint like some long ago lump of Ediacaran mystery meat, not in mudstone, but in my brain. Samuel Delany once proposed a modular calculus, i.e. a semiotic mathematics whereby given a set of signs in system B corresponding to a set of things in System A, an observer in System C could calculate the contents of System A in their entirety, or at least the operational rules of System A. In Delaney's words, such a calculus would consist of a set of equations that will take the description of an event, however partial, and elaborate it into a reasonable, accurate, and complete explanation of that event. If System A equals the world and System B equals my memory, does System B contain enough information to recover thing X from whole Y in System A? Because that is my struggle here. My undergrad courses in educational psychology suggest one interpretation, possible though purely hypothetical. I estimated my age at the time of that encounter with the thing in the hole in the tree as 3 or 4 years old, but I am only really certain it all happened before I started school. I may have been as young as 2 or younger. In that case, my grasp of object permanence may not yet have become permanently fixed in my cognitive architecture. Perhaps that experience marks a liminal moment, a watershed in my wiring when my nascent sense of object permanence was operating in an ecstatic, hyperexcited state. Perhaps the module of my brain responsible for recognizing the continued existence of that object when it was no longer in sight flipped some irreversible switch, which would explain why for me that slimy lost orb became fixed in space and mind while forever removed and receding in time. Like Philip K. Dick's great exegesis, this written meditation could sprawl on as long as I live and can write. Could I eventually thus construct a full System B, a mirror of the universe in System A? Or can I only approach my goal asymptotically, never quite reaching close enough to split the thin film between the past and now, enough for me to reach through and pull that thing back over into System A? That I cannot feels like a failure of my memory and my ability as a writer. That such a system would be an abomination of particularism, like that produced by Borges's Funes de Memorias. The day is not far off when the house I grew up in will leave my family, and I will no longer have access to it or that unremarkable corner of its backyard. Even then, that bulbous thing will remain in place, somewhere within a few square feet of a point only I can identify, but removed from my access that much more. Someday I myself will die, but even that will not destroy the thing. I fear I made it eternal the day I popped it out of its hole in the tree, that it will continue to exist in its shadow world, constrained to a limited set of coordinates, but permanently untethered from our world by my demise, an object ghost with no one left to haunt. Or perhaps it was I who trapped it all these years, with my hyperactive sense of its existence, in which case my death will free it from that final anchor in its strange other space. Where will it wander when it is finally free? What will hatch from that unwholesome egg?
Wow.
So Meg, I was able to riff on your eggs there. That's why I was back and forth between a couple of things, and I thought when you read that story, I thought, no, I'm going to go with the egg.
I thought eggs were like I thought we were like sinking.
Yeah,
we really were.
I like when you can do that in a reading.
It was amazing.
You just
Sorry, Laura?
that's just amazing that you just picked that up. I love that. I love both the stories.
Right.
Daniel, are you still there in the dark void?
Speak to us, Daniel,
You know
from your
what?
hole in the void.
We have these stupid jealous pixies or something that just come and wreak havoc sometimes when they know it's going to be a really
This
awesome
is one of the main
reading.
reasons I stopped doing my Outer Dark podcast, because I had lots of technical issues, and eventually it just became really almost traumatic. I mean, there were several times where I recorded entire shows that didn't record.
What?
Yeah.
That's horrible. Well, I mean, we're depending on Zoom and Facebook, so you know we have a little.
Yeah.
We have our
That's a
own
little bit different, but there.
issues.
I won't say I've seen every tech issue, because if I say that, I know the next time I ever try to go back and do it again, I'll have some brand new tech issue.
Yeah, the pixies will spawn a new one for you.
Yeah.
But
And they're not even the kind of pixies you can hang out on the airplane wing and try to shoot, like William Shatner.
no, they don't play songs with good bass, anything. They're not any of the right kinds of pixies. But I did want to let you know that.
My
Oh, are you back with us?
connection has been dropping and coming back.
Oh, yeah, the voice got
Flapping.
you underwater, Daniel. You're breaking up a lot. So
Are you in a
Yeah,
tree?
sort of. My connection has really been flapping. I don't know if you can hear me at all. Yeah. So why don't you wrap it up?
just a tiny bit. You're really choppy. So
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and wrap it
okay.
up?
Sorry,
I'm not even
Daniel.
gonna try anymore.
So this was a fantastic night. We're so lucky that we got these two writers of weird fiction on together and had this weird Wednesday evening. It's been fantastic. And so thank you for bringing your little horrific strange eggs for us. That's really something.
Meg, I'm honored to read with you.
I'm absolutely honored to read with you, Scott. When I found out, I was like, wait, that's Scott? Yes.
Yeah, can you that guy. That guy everybody hates.
No. No.
We love it when that happens. So I do recommend that you go and check out the Story Hour page on Facebook, because that's where all of our videos are recorded. So you can watch this one as many times as you want. You can watch lots of other ones. We've had all kinds of weird authors on over the past 2 years, like Martin and Craig Lawrence Gidney and
Craig is great.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Craig has a new
and
collection coming out. You should get him back on.
You know what? We just had him on for that reason.
We'll have him on again.
Just
have him on all the time.
He's amazing. Primi Mohammed, just, so many great writers reading so much great stuff. It's not always weird, but it's a great thing. It's always a great thing. And you can also go to storyhour2020.com to check out and see who's coming up so that you don't miss them if you're available on a Wednesday. But if you did, you can always just go to Facebook and watch them again. So that's how things work here. And next week, we have Ruth Hoffray and Amy Ogden, who've both been on before and are both fantastic. So I recommend adding that to your calendar. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Our readers, Daniel, hope you beat the void. And all of our wonderful regulars, everyone who showed up, everyone who's going to show up in the future to watch this on Facebook. Thank you very much for joining us to spin the fictive dream together. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.